Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Ruchira Bharadwaj. I am the Chief Human Resources Officer at Future Generali India Life. Thank you for joining us and welcome to yet another power-packed session of Masters Speak, brought to you by Future Generali India Life Insurance. Yesterday, we had the joy of listening to one of India's most respected thought leaders on market strategy and on consumer economy, Ms. Rama Bijapurkar. What an insightful session that was, and kudos to the audiences for asking some great questions too. In case you missed the session, you can find the same along with our sessions on our pages on the social platforms. It is rather simple. All you need to do is follow our social pages, and you would be kept updated on all the action that is happening on those pages. Today, I welcome another powerful speaker on Masters Speak. From Future of Consumerism, we will today segue into Future of Careers and Jobs. But before I introduce our master speaker for today, some quick checks. First, I hope all of you who are watching this show and your families are safe and healthy. If you are, please click the like button on your screen. Second, if you can hear us loud and clear, click the like button on your screen. Third, our guest speaker, Mr. Shriram, wants to know which part of the country you are joining us from. So do share that in the comments section. Lastly, a very important one. Go ahead and tag your friends who you think should watch this session right now. Share your comments through the session and ask your questions in the comments section as our guest speaker takes you through the future of work. I will be putting your questions to our speaker, and 2 lucky questions will get gift vouchers from us. So do stay till the end of the session to have a chance at that. Now, coming to the very relevant and topical subject of today. Globalization and COVIDization, if I may say so, forced many disruptions across the world. Technology, digital, and power of computing has further brought in significant shifts in business models for many. Clearly, a lot has been changing around us, and this global pandemic has not only accelerated those changes, but has also disrupted our work routines and life as we knew it. It is bound to have a profound impact on many facets of our lives, and it is bound to redefine the employment and career landscape as well. Our special guest for today is an accomplished human resources veteran, one of the deepest thought leaders in India. We can hold a conversation with him on any subject because he is going to lead those conversations with utmost clarity and depth. And when it comes to human psychology and what drives human behaviors, one may find it difficult to match his incisiveness. He's going to help us gain insights about future of work. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Yogi Sriram to you. Welcome, sir. Mr. Sriram is advisor to CEO and MD Group Human Resources, Larsen & Toubro. Driven and focused HR thought leader with over 42 years of shaping the HR functions across diverse industries, from manufacturing, hospitality, finance, FMCG, engineering, petroleum, and now construction. He shaped the HR function at the Shriram Group, NTPC, Asea Brown Boveri Limited, and led the HR functions at giants such as Dabur, BP, the Taj Group, before joining the L&T Group. He is a member of many executive committees and boards. An extremely powerful keynote speaker, as we will all witness today. So let me hand it over to Mr. Yogi Sriram now. All yours, and over to you, sir.
Thanks, Ruchira. Thanks, Ashish. Just a quick clarification. I'm a guy who sticks to the knitting. So the topic that was suggested was discovering the contours of a new career. So while of course I possibly will also delve on some aspects of the future of work, I'll try to talk about this in the next about 35-40 minutes, uh, particularly because I thought that the audience will be interested in times like this about what one should do when you try to sculpt a new career. And I myself am going through a particular phase of life. I retired on the 1st of April midnight from Larsen and Toubro as Senior Vice President, Human Resources, Corporate Human Resources, and HR head for the whole group. And from the second, I have been appointed as an advisor. So my role is quite different. My role is a process of rediscovery, and I also have other interests in life. So I thought that when I talk about the discovering the contours of a new career, I'll also personalize it as much as possible. The example that comes to my mind when one talks about one's career is to look at one's own persona, especially in today's context, one's digital persona as a kind of a brand. And I think since you heard Rama speaking yesterday, and she is a marketing guru, it's very important for us also to manage our own brands, our own personal, our personas like a brand. And I think when you look at examples of brands that have rediscovered themselves, one name that comes to my mind is Lego. Lego had a debt of about $800 million in 2003, and 2015, in about 12 years, became miraculously one of the most powerful brands with a profit of 600 million. But what did they do in order to rediscover their brand? They actually regained their focus. One of the big things which is very important when one is sculpting one's career and one is going through a transition view. So you're cognitively very much the same person on 1st of April and on 2nd of April. I'm cognitively the same person, except that on 2nd of April and before the 1st of April, I should have spent enough time in figuring out what should I do to refocus myself on a new career. What should I do instead of becoming helpless and thinking that, I have now reached a stage of decline and maintenance and so on. What should I do in terms of having more fun with the competencies that I have? So one of the things that Lego did was to regain their focus. And believe it or not, there is nothing like too much innovation. So innovation applies also in one's own in career in managing one's own career. Innovation applies when you think about what is it new that you can do. And Lego is proof of that. So the near demise, it had a near demise. The brand began creating many different products, some of which were successful and some of which were not. So the lesson out of the Lego rebranding is experiment, have fun, look at new careers, but while you're doing that, no harm in failing because it's important that you discover and rediscover. So, a former management consultant at McKinsey and Company, Joran Nudstorp, Knudstop, joined them and he became the CEO of Lego. He insisted that Lego must go back to the bricks. I have a few Lego sets in my house. I love playing with Lego and I love playing with scale model trains as two of my hobbies. But if you look at the Lego profile, it's basically a lot of bricks. And what they had was 12,900 bricks in all their Lego sets. And they reduced it to 7,000 to make it much more manageable. So they first focused on what does the customer want. And they found new markets to dominate. So when everything goes digital, Lego had to find a way of how to stay relevant and how to remain true to itself and its purpose. And then, of course, what Lego did was to get to know their audience. So it's very important if you're going to become a digital marketeer or if you're going to become someone who is going to go into a calling of, say, learning R and learning analytics. Who are my audience and what is it that they require? And Lego did extensive ethnographic studies to find out how the kids around the world, like, and some kids even my age, love playing with Lego. So they checked with people of different ages and different profiles and so on to find out what they liked. And that's how they came to their conclusion. I was reading some time back about this Thane-based young person called Arjun Deshpande. Comes across as a regular teenager kicking a football around and reading books. He's just 18 years old and unique in his mission. What Arjun tells us and me is that curiosity is extremely essential. What he did was he was traveling extensively with his mother, who was working in a pharmaceutical company. And he discovered while traveling and observing with all his curiosity that medicines are a necessity today. And it's terrible that the common man needs to pay exorbitant prices to purchase them. So his goal was to eliminate the basic yet fundamental problem by providing certified medicines at affordable prices. So he was the founder of an organization called Generic Aadhaar, the Better India. And the startup purchases generic quality medicines from government approved manufacturing units and sells at prices that are 80% lower compared to the market. And Arjun, who's presently awaiting his 12th standard results, started the company last year with an investment of about 15 lakhs from his parents. So all you need is to be curious and to look for something with all the uh, curiosity of a child. What happens, I think, with many adults is as they grow older, their curiosity gets a bit blunted. We are always trained as children to to stop daydreaming and things. I think this is a time when one should go back to what one did in childhood, of tending to daydream, to find out in one's subconscious mind what do you want to do, and to be curious about how things work. So that is extremely important. 5 years from now, almost one third of the skills that are important in today's workforce would have changed. And this is from the World Economic Forum. So, therefore, careers must be rediscovered. And it's not only for people who are retiring, it's people who are in their 30s, people in their 20s, people in their 40s, any age. You know, when I grew up in the late 70s, in the early parts of my career, the lifelong dream was to own a DDA flat, Delhi Development Authority, a very middle class kind of a aspiration, and to have a 5 day week and to own a Maruti 800 car, a little jalopy which was rolled out in the mid 80s. And that was the middle class dream. And one cruised along life and one didn't do much. So, when in those days, if you asked a person who passed out of an MBA school, when did you read your last book? Probably would have scratched his head and said, maybe 6 months back. When did you read your second book? I don't know when. Did you put on weight during the first 5 years? Yes, I did. So those are the days when people were a little more complacent and things. I think today one has to be much more agile and on the ball as far as careers are concerned. I was looking at the history of how a draftsman's job has developed. You know, if you take the various ages, if you take the Paleolithic age, Paleolithic, 15,000 BC, and then you take the Egyptian age, you take the classical 900 BC age, then you take the medieval age, 1000 AD, you take the age of Renaissance, which was 1000 AD, you take the modern 1800 age, and then you take the technological age of 1980s when CAD, etc., were developed. And then you look at 2012 when liquid was developed as a kind of a designing theory or a designing medium. You see that the evolution of architectural visualization has changed drastically. So, what is important is people have also evolved, except that in this reading of architectural visualization, what I realized is that the time gap between one phase and the other reduced drastically. So careers in the future are going to be redefined much faster than they were because of technological obsolescence and so on. And that is very important for us to note. Unfortunately, when you look at least the Indian context, I know that I'm speaking to audiences who may be logging in from various parts of the world. Uh, what the World Economic Forum says is 50% of the subject knowledge acquired during the first year of a 4 year technical degree will be outdated by the time students graduate. So a lot of the knowledge which one is, in fact, the notes that professors have and so on are going to be outdated by the time one is going to, pass out and graduate. As Ruchira said, I've been in the field for about 43 years. And I've spent a lot of my life in trying to look for candidates with the right kind of capabilities. So I thought that I should share with you the distilled kind of experience that I've had in interviewing candidates. If you don't mind, I'm looking above my laptop at the wonderful sea. I'm actually 200 meters off the road, and there's a beautiful sea view that I can see. So once in a while, to draw inspiration from my memory and to draw inspiration from the past, I'll be looking at the sea and the lovely ships which are floating around. What employers are looking for are candidates with the potential to adapt. More than the domain knowledge alone, it's looking at the ability to adapt. Is this person a person who can adapt to work from home? Is the person able to adapt from working from, from an individual status into a team status? Is the person hung up about egos and stuff? Is the person ready to work with the hand? Now, this is very, very important. I think working with hands and legs is extremely important besides the mind. And I think, particularly in countries like India, the do it yourself culture is to become more common because once one does an MBA and so on, one is very hands off, and particularly white collar jobs are very hands off. And I think in today's context, being hands on is very important. So, therefore, candidates with the potential to adopt and expand their roles in this ever changing environment are preferred to candidates who prefer to remain static. So, amongst the traits that they look for are curiosity, insight, and the initiative to learn. What is extremely important in sculpting one's career is the urge and the ability to learn all the time. I mean, learning is God. And there are two types of learning. One is called the single loop learning, and the other is called double loop learning. We'll come to that a little later. But learning is very, very important. And learning means accumulating knowledge one on top of the other. Some of the knowledge you may draw upon like a reservoir when it's required. Some of it may be rejected. But knowledge is different from information. Knowledge is more applied, and therefore focusing and concentrating on knowledge and converting it into a skill is very important when you're planning for futures in the future careers. And what I noticed is with longer and twistier career paths today, you have twists and turns in career paths. You have group dynamics. You have organizational dynamics. Your own organizational profile might change. The way your company is doing might change. The performance might change. Developing the habits that support continuous learning, reflection, and engagement will ensure that you remain relevant for years to come. Future generally is all about insurance, and the best way to ensure your life, ensure your career, is to continue to learn. Almost all managers I found in my interviewing people and in reflecting on their careers and doing reference checks and so on, wherever it is possible, almost all managers have one career limiting habit, just one. And that limiting habit is the ability not to say no. So it's a debilitating kind of habit. So learning to say no is essential to become reliable in your work. Keeping a promise is when you've assessed carefully what does it mean to say yes, what does it mean to keep to the commitment, and therefore in new careers that we are talking about, trust is the new economic currency, and ability to keep a promise, ability to deliver as per the deadline, and not just say that it was anyway too steep the kind of deadline that I had agreed to and therefore I failed, is not going to be excusable in the future. And technology is making it increasingly easy to do the immediate but unimportant stuff at the expense of important stuff. So prioritization is extremely important if one is sculpting a new career. I think what technology is teaching us, what MS Teams and other media is teaching us, is technology is going to rule our lives. You have to be extremely structured, going from one meeting to another, and so on. And therefore, one has to be very careful and disciplined about how you organize your life. And the difference between the difference between the career you have and the career you want is most likely to be one or two habits. And in every organization, especially at the top levels, what one looks for is the ability to find and piece together disparate pieces of information and to get a new insight or a view of the whole, which is very, very essential. In the recent days when we've gone through the very, very stern lockdowns in India, which were necessary, and also the various MHA, Ministry of Home Affairs guidelines, there was lots and lots to decode and lots to decipher. There are a lot of disparate bits of information that you got from various organizations. What were they doing? What is the precedent? What is the cost going to be in case you suspend operations? There were so many. And what is the cost going to be if people get infected? Enormous. And what is it that you need to do in terms of following the guidelines? What do you do in terms of graded resumption of work? How do you keep people safe? So there were disparate pieces of information. And to gather new insights out of these disparate pieces of information is a very, very important competency as you sculpt your future. I also want to share with you that most CEOs have very, very simple kind of strategies. It's not complex. They don't use jargon. They don't use very complicated words, and they're stunningly simple. So being very simple in one's communication is very important as one sculpts one's future. I've noticed in many interviews that candidates struggle to keep the sentences short, succinct, and clear. They sort of ramble sometimes all around the place. Even writings are rambling all over the place. I think short sentences of 10 to 15 words are in. So communicating clearly, executing fast, thinking creatively, and acting with courage is going to be very in when you're sculpting new careers. There are all kinds of people in this world. Some people hold on to jobs for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes it is loyalty, sometimes it is just complacency. I talked about the DDA flat and the Maruti 800. Sometimes it is waiting to get promoted. But all these don't matter. I think what is very important is continue to assess whether you have a new skill to survive a new world which is going to be looking for that skill. And complacency can be the worst enemy. Just like an organization can't afford to be complacent, people also can't afford to be complacent. I'll tell you why. I think almost every organization is looking for opportunities to get leaner. They're looking for opportunities to get flatter. They're all talking about reducing hierarchy, and and all this means that they want people to use a mix of lateral thinking and assertiveness to move ahead with this kind of a organization design. They don't want people to keep on questioning why do you don't need. I mean, why are you questioning this particular level? They're looking at flatter organizations. They're looking at customer contact, which is much more agile as compared to the past, and so on. And the question today is not whether a company's employees and leaders have the right skills. It is whether they have the potential to learn new ones. So that is the most important competency. And the first indicator of potential is the kind of motivation that one has. So when you talk about motivation in times like this, there is a whole subject in behavioral science called positive psychology, which consists of the resilience that you have, the kind of attitudes of flourishing that you have. There's an author called Dr. Seligman who writes a lot about this. And therefore, the fierce commitment to excel in the pursuit of unselfish goals is very important in times like this. So there are four indicators which are very important of very important indicators, I would say, when you're sculpting a new career: curiosity, insight, engagement, and determination. Curiosity, insight, engagement, and determination. And in this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, experience and knowledge are really lesser in terms of relevance as compared to the past. The capacity to learn and adopt, be resilient, and connect with others have become much more critical. I think one of the very, very important competencies in this new world, and when you're looking at the contours of a new career, is social intelligence. Social intelligence is based on a basket of competencies such as flexibility, empathy, adaptability, how aware you are about what is going on in the organization, how well networked you are within the organization, leave alone outside. And this will differentiate the stars from the average performers. So that is extremely important. And these characteristics, I think, can take. A social intelligence, when you're interacting digitally, when you're talking to people over a screen, when you're trying to read the tea leaves in a room, when people have switched when they've muted their mics and they've switched off their videos, etc., is a skill which is different from what it was in the physical world. So what I would say is that picking up subtleties and nuances of voice intonation, picking up whether a person is extremely silent in a particular situation or not, is very important when you're trying to read the tea leaves. 2 decades ago, psychologists Robert and Joyce Hogan created an inventory called the Hogan Inventory, which has 11 dark traits, and these are called the derailers. What they do is they have actually made clusters of these traits, and they can be divided into sub clusters also. The dark side traits can be divided into three subclusters by and large. The first are distancing traits: being excitable, being moody, skeptical, and cynical, and passively aggressive. That means saying yes, yes to a group, but actually being very, very rebellious about it is known as passive aggression, where you seem to listen but do not cooperate. The second cluster is being bold and confident to the point of being arrogant, being mischievous to the point of being reckless. And the third is ingratiating traits: being diligent to the boss and micromanaging with subordinates, being dutiful versus being eager to please. So, if you want to know your dark traits, then people in your life, as opposed to you at work, who don't necessarily praise you all the time, will be better able to tell you. So, this is the time really when you're, in whichever part of the world you are, in a lockdown or outside a lockdown, uh, observing physical distancing norms, etc. All of us are doing that. Great time to connect with people digitally who may not think the way you think, who might be contradicting you once in a while, who might look as your opposition. Ask them about what you can do better, and they can tell you about some of these darker traits. So remember the Hogan inventory. You can take that. I highly recommend that, not because I'm a representative of Hogan, but it's a good, sensible kind of a test to tell you about what could be your derailers. There are many others, but this sounds to me quite interesting. Career advancement is a function of how people see you. So people perceive you in different ways. They perceive you in a meeting, they perceive you in a group, they perceive you uh, when you're talking to them digitally. Uh, Unfortunately, the problem is that even a small slip uh, of ignoring negative feedback, the way you use your gestures, the way you use your emojis. Actually, emojis are nothing but gestures in the digital world. And responding impulsively or unpleasantly to an email which has upset you, just waiting to press that reply button. You may save it in your draft, but you want to get that guy. It's something that can be a big derailer, can cause significant reputational damage. So social intelligence in exercising control in these days is very important when you're sculpting a new career. Unlearning is not about forgetting. It is actually choosing an alternate mental model. And choosing an alternate mental model or paradigm is not easy. A lot of people are talking about work from home these days. And I think great work has been done by Bloom in his paper of 2015, where he has experimented along with the chief executive of a company called C Trip, which is a travel agency in China, about what are the advantages of work from home. And I think through using randomized controlled trials, which is a statistical technique used by the three Nobel Prize winners recently of economics, it's a great method to really find out about how one can change one's mental model. What did he do? There's 16,000 people in this NASDAQ listed company. And what he did was to choose a sample of 996 people from this company who were in the call center. And he asked them, do you want to participate in this experiment? 506 people said they were interested. 240 or so met the criteria of having an isolated room in their home where they could work from home. They also met the criteria of having the broadband that was required. They also met the criteria in terms uh, of having no distractions and of having the right kind of facilities and so on. And most important, they met the criteria of being for at least 6 months in the organization. What they found was there was a dramatic increase in the productivity. He found that the group that was in at sitting at home and working, they were much more happier. They were the productivity went up and so on. But it was very interesting that when they wanted to, based on the success of this experiment, since they adapted a new mental model, they wanted to roll this out for the entire company. And guess what? Many of the people who said they loved working from home changed their mind. They changed their mind saying that we feel isolated, we've learned more about ourselves in this time, and so on. And the entire concept of work from home tested during the time when the infection is rampant and when one is locked down in the house is different from when in normal times and so on. So therefore, unlearning is the ability and the agility to learn new mental models. And I want to share something very, very important in my own life as I go forward in shaping up my career. Very few believe in evidence-based management. Evidence-based management is used more in marketing. And maybe you heard more about that yesterday. Evidence-based management is based on research, it's based on insights, it's based on studying patterns and so on. Believe it or not, if you go to a physician, barely 15% of the knowledge of a physician is based on research. It's mainly based on experience. And therefore, uh, I think it's very important to now rely upon evidence based management as you reposition yourself in a career. And if one is more interested in this subject, please read Pfeffer, who's from Stanford University. And the world has become now many to many, but we still operate with a one to many kind of a mindset. So it's very important now to look at techniques such as crowdsourcing and stuff when one is, trying to get insights. And organizations' hierarchies, we're seeing a move now in organizational hierarchies from formal kind of hierarchies to fluid networks. And our instinct is to think of an organization as an organization chart. That's the normal model that we have. But I think when you're looking at new kind of career, multi-skilling, the ability to accept bosses who are perhaps a little younger than you, the ability to respect knowledge, the ability to respect referral power are all extremely important. So in the process of unlearning, there are three parts. First, you must recognize that the old mental model is no longer relevant or effective. Second, you need to find or create a new mental model. Change for the sake of change is no point. Third, you need to ingrain the new mental habits. So all these are very important. And it's important to learn more and more as career paths meander and lengthen. So when you're learning a new skill, make sure you have the aptitude to learn it, and then be sure uh, that your work needs it. So it's important. For example, I love working with my hands. I have a hobby which is I work on scale model trains, and I love converting analog trains into digital trains. And I find that it's a very interesting calling. Maybe I can make it a part of my calling as I go forward in my life. I've done HR with a lot of exposure to law, a lot of exposure to HR practice, behavioral science, and stuff. But maybe that's my new calling. Maybe another new calling could be wildlife photography because I love the triangle of ISO and aperture and speed. I love experimenting with in wildlife photography. So I think please do experiment as you're going into a new future and new career. And one of the quickest ways to learn something is to try and teach it as you learn. I think it's the other day I did a webinar on randomized controlled trials. I haven't used it much, but I learned it through the net. I learned it through reading. I learned it through the experiments that people have done. And of course, the WFH experiment, which I just talked about, and it taught me a lot. So teach and you learn more. And an ongoing skill acquisition is critical to persistent professional relevance. I think it's very important as you look at a new career, the contours of a new career, to change your narrative. Uh, the narrative matters a lot in this world. What's the narrative for a retired person? Don't go out. You're about 60. You'll get COVID-19. Protect yourself. Let the younger people go out. You should now relax. You've retired. I hope you're okay. That's the narrative. And sometimes I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So don't change your narrative. What is unsupportive self-talk? I don't need to learn this. What is supportive self-talk? What would my future look like if I did? What is unsupportive self talk? I'm already fine at this. What is supportive self talk? Am I really good? How do I compare with my peers? Unsupportive self talk. This is boring. Supportive self talk. I wonder why others find it interesting. Unsupportive self talk. I am terrible at this. Supportive self talk. I am making beginner mistakes, but I'll get better. And for this, something like YouTube is wonderful. You can keep going through it and learning, and you can go through. There are lots of other platforms, not only in India but world over, which you can subscribe to and learn new things. Every company actually, this is another secret that I would like to share with you. Every company faces a learning dilemma. What is the learning dilemma? The smartest people find it hardest to learn. Very interesting. The smartest people find it hardest to learn. So you don't need to really, illustrate to the management and the company that you're the smartest person. What is important is your propensity to learn. And when I talked a little while earlier about single loop learning and double loop learning, single loop learning is like adjusting a thermostat. If you fix it at 68 degrees Fahrenheit and you find that it's either switches on or switches off, you change it because it's too hot or too cold for you, and therefore that's single loop learning. Double loop learning is when the thermostat is fixed at 68 degrees, uh, ask, should I really use a geyser or a water heater at all? Uh, what is the need for using this? I've done my yoga. I can use tepid water, which is coming out of the tap. We are in Bombay right now in the hot summer, and I don't need the geyser at all. So questioning the goal itself is single loop learning, double loop learning, which is different from single loop. And I think that is very important as a skill when you get into new careers. Highly skilled professionals are good at single loop learning, whereas people who have the ability to arrive at insights, who have the ability to participate in strategy discussions, uh, changing the mental models, and so on, are the people who are adept at double loop learning. Constant change in markets, strategy, best practices, technology, and more means that our skills can become outdated quickly. So you cannot afford, as I said earlier, to coast on previous accomplishment. So success in doing a career early is not a good proxy in terms of a career. Therefore, established competencies are something that one has to challenge. By the way, I noticed also that a set of competencies are very important. There's something called development centers or assessment centers, which one uses in companies to judge people and to judge their competencies and so on. I think in today's context, using a portfolio of competencies according to the situation is more important than focusing only on a single set of competencies. So people use different sets of feedback from 360 degrees, from assessment centers, development centers, and if you've done in your something in your career and you are at a tipping point where you're changing your career, good for you to go back into those reports and look at those. Uh, because constant change can happen only if you try to improve upon what people have felt about the future, about the past. There's a famous author called Edgar Schein. He talks about career authors, a career. He talks about career anchors, and this author is describes about the importance of career anchors. It's important to look at what are your career anchors, because career anchor is the pattern of self-perceived areas of competence, motives, values that guide and contain career choices. You can make a career choice in your 40s, your 30s, your 20s, or whenever. And it's very important in shaping an individual's personality, identity, and includes one, competence, the things that we believe we are good at and not so good at. So segregate those. Motives and needs, what is important to us, make the form of goals in terms of money, status, challenge, autonomy. Attitudes and values, the kind of organization that we feel comfortable with, one that matches our own values and beliefs. So this is extremely important when you think about career anchors. And how do you choose the kind of career anchor that you want? One is based on lifestyle. You seek a situation that permits you to balance and integrate your personal needs, your family needs, and requirements of your career. The other is pure challenge. You seek the opportunity to work on solutions, service, and dedication. Some people want to do a career with companies which are NGOs or Section 8 companies, which have altruistic motives, or do you have entrepreneurial creativity? Do you want to start doing painting and selling your paintings and so on? Are you looking for security and stability? Do you look for autonomy or independence? Are you general managerial in terms of administration and stuff, or are you technical? So all these count when you're looking at a career anchor. And how you should choose the right kind of career is, first of all, learn how to learn more about yourself. Continue to reflect, to increase your self insight, to observe yourself, and to ask the people around you about what they've observed about you. Learn about yourself. Learning about yourself, of course, is a lifelong task because each new experience reveals new facets. Analyze your present job, your role or situation. If you're out of a job, analyze what happened in the last job. How well did it fit your career needs? Some people suffer a job just because of the money, and they just suffer it because they need the money. But I think what is very important in today's time is you can make a choice. Is it congruent with your career anchors? And plan ahead. Does your job need redesign to be fulfilling in the future? As you contemplate future career life moves, what kind of adjustments do you need to make? What kind of additional education and training do you need? Finally, when you go for an interview, or when you ask a future employer, or when you look at future prospects, communicate your needs. You need to know the conclusions you've made. So, spending time today on a good profile, a digital profile, without all the jazz of animations and stuff, but with facts which are not contradicting each other, which are clear, which are succinct, easy to read, which are organized, is very, very important. So communicate your needs, communicate your aspirations, build your digital persona, and whatever it is, whether you like LinkedIn or whichever platform you like, and become active in managing your career. That those are my messages. So it's been 45 minutes since we've been into the talk. I was told 45 minutes for the talk and 15 minutes for the Q&A. Uh, I told Ashish a little before this talk that I'm reasonably structured, and I hope I'm stuck to the time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for your time and the insights that you shared with us, Yogi. There are a whole lot of questions which have come, so I will start with. Can I start with one of mine?
Sure, sure, anytime.
So we have seen there have been n number of paradoxes which have emerged today because of COVID times, and which have made decision making truly a core competency to have, as I see. How would you think leaders at all levels, and not just only at the top, should focus on to hone this skill about understanding the paradoxes and deciding what to do?
Interesting question, because if you, Ruchira, look at uh, the word judgment, how do you make a judgment before you make a decision? The word judgment, unfortunately, in Indian languages has a very approximate translation. The nearest that you can get to the word judgment in Hindi is nirnay, and nirnay actually means decision. So I have a feeling, this is of course based on my intuitive thought, that a lot more time on reflecting, a lot more time in understanding one's own biases, a lot more time in trying to look at uh, what is the impact of a particular situation in the short term and the long term is important in managing these paradoxes. Because what can happen in a paradox is it can be totally confusing. Take today's times. If you're, let's say, planning for an organization in terms of strategy, I guess that in these uncertain times, it's very important to have three scenarios: scenario one, scenario two, and scenario three. Very often, Ruchira, as the scenarios become more and more remote from the first scenario, meaning the second and the third, they're not as robust as the first scenario. I think today's context, it's a little bit like the second service of a ace tennis player. The second service is nearly as good as the first service, as fast, and so on. So the scenario planning has to be done extremely well in managing these paradoxes, whether it's the company or the individual or whatever situation.
Thank you. There's Mukesh Prajapat who asks about in this COVID situation, everyone is trying to update themselves and wanting to multitask, and something that you also spoke about. And it's a very interesting take that he has. He's saying, what's the thin line difference between learning and unlearning?
Like I said when I spoke a few minutes earlier, unlearning is dismantling a mental model. Let me illustrate. There's a lot of talk these days about using AI, artificial intelligence, in making decisions. The problem is that some of our own personal biases may be locked into that artificial intelligence algorithm. So it's very important to be aware of one's biases, to be very aware of a particular mental model's relevance during a time, and to relook at mental models which are relevant according to the times. Some mental models will never change, but some mental models need to be looked at again and again. I mean, if you look at the development of medicine, for example, the field of medicine, the mental models changed completely. There was a particular surgeon in the British Navy who experimented with something as simple as lime juice in order to rid sailors who were out in the sea for many days of a disease called scurvy. So a mental model changed. All it meant was giving that sailor one orange a day. So mental models are learnt or unlearned depending on your capability to research. And as I mentioned during my talk, evidence-based management is much more valuable today than field-based or intuitive kind of theories. So the ability to look at data, the ability to dismantle your model, to question it, and of course, very important in this whole process is the ability to manage one's own ego, because mental models and strong egos have a causality.
Right. Yes, and you spoke about earlier about curiosity and knowledge in a very detailed way. One of the questions that has come, in fact, a lot of questions that have come is learning virtually. So, and many people are wanting to know how are organizations, how should organizations gear up to make people learn virtually, and how digital learning should be really structured so that we also know that people do not have the same learning styles. What would
Yeah,
you what would
yeah.
you suggest on that?
So thank you for that question. It's an excellent question. See, one cannot recreate a classroom in a computer for sure. Uh, the ability to analyze, deconstruct a particular problem, the ability to work with peers around you, which is the typical Harvard Business School type of learning, the ability to debate, uh, the physical presence of people around you to really uh, look at the problem from different angles is something which is very difficult to recreate in a digital platform. In fact, it is said that 90% of our learning about each other is through nonverbal communication. What you can see of me right now is my head and a part of my t-shirt and my hand going up and down, and of course my train track and stuff. But what you don't see of me is some subtleties in terms of my body language and stuff which you're missing out. So I think this is very, very important in learning. Having said that, the good side about digital learning and the good side about e-learning is that you can reinforce and strengthen theory a lot. Whenever I talk about theory in an interview, Ruchira, when we're interviewing even HR people, they think, they silently think that Yogi Sriram is a bit of a professor just because he's asking about Hawthorne experiments and things. But I tell you, theory is from the word theater, and theater is very important for practice. There are players in the theater who play, who are actors. So therefore, knowing the theory is extremely important. So digital learning can be extremely useful in reinforcing one's theory. Second is, I don't know how it is in most other countries, especially in the advanced countries, but in India, it's taboo to raise your hand and says, "Teacher, I don't understand or I don't agree." I think the good news is that when you're looking at digital learning, especially if it's an interactive platform, there is a lot one can do in terms of challenging assumptions and learning new things. Now, there are three, four stages in terms of digital platforms. One is the stage which is even before LMS, Learning Management System. That is, like maybe NPTEL or maybe the SWAYAM platform and so on, where courses are just loaded on the computer. Could be useful because I won't poo-poo them. They may not be as engaging as an interactive platform, but could be useful in theory. Then there is the LMS platform where you have drop-down menus, and then you can from Coursera or whatever choose whether you want to get into decision making or whether you want to get into Kepner-Trego or whatever technique you want to in detail. Now there are the LXPs, which are learning management platforms, which are interactive and which also suggest to you about what new things you should learn. So, in my view, learning through wire, learning digitally, is a very interesting way. And by the way, there are many other methods. There is radio, there is television, there is podcasts. We listen to a Hindu podcast every morning over tea, my wife and I. Of course, it's a bit of morose information about COVID cases and stuff, but there's a lot of good information about what is happening with respect to the progress on the vaccine, with respect to other medicines that are being tried and stuff. So I think when you look at the classroom, it's actually a great example to answer the previous question, which was on unlearning, is dismantling a particular mental model and getting into a new one.
Great, thank you. There's a question from Rakesh Vadva. Rakesh is the Chief Marketing Officer for Future Generali. He says, you spoke continually picking relevant skills, maintaining learning agility. However, on the demand side, organizations still are highly parochial when it comes to hiring people from different industries. So there is a risk aversion, and that is more prevalent as one moves up the hierarchy. What are your views or advice to organizations such as those?
I think organizations are going to change. They're going to be rediscovering themselves. They cannot remain in the same kind of a mindset as they were. They're looking for people for, let's say, e-commerce company is looking for people who are extremely creative with respect to supply chain. They're ready to look at people who have different kind of perspectives and so on. It's a question of how you position yourself and how you think differently and able to, get to 30,000 feet in terms of looking at the big picture, looking at the strategy, as well as zoom in to also perform and implement. Implementation is key. I belong to an organization, Larsen and Toubro, as an advisor, where execution is extremely important. So just talking about a strategy and just talking about ideas without implementation is no point. So I think there are plenty of opportunities where companies will have to rediscover themselves. Take the real estate sector. The real estate sector has to learn about new ways of air conditioning a building. I mean, the old ways of air conditioning a building are not going to work with the infection that we are battling at present, as well as any future infections. Look at transportation. Look at so many things. I mean, this whole experience of the last 3 months has changed our lives. Perhaps is a great opportunity for companies, people, and everybody else to think creatively and think of new things. So I do think that companies are going to become less hierarchical. Now, when you look at me, you can't see my office cabin, right? You see me in my home. You see pictures around. You see my train track. You see the ceiling fan. You see a light which looks like a railway fan. And you know me better. So it's more democratic now. I don't come across as ex-senior vice president HR of Larsen and Toubro. I look like anybody else, like one of you whom I would love to see on the screen, except that the system can't take too many. All of us are at home, and therefore the size of the room you are in, the kind of cabin you are in, etc., gets less important. Power equations become different, and therefore I hope and I think, and maybe I'm optimistic, that the new way of dealing with each other makes organizations less parochial, to use your language.
Rakesh, hope you got the answer. There's a very interesting question from Abhishek Varma, Yogi. He asks, saying, is middle management as a layer outmoded now, or even the upper middle layer? Are companies now looking for hands-on workers and less of managers in this world?
I don't know. Maybe it's time to discover the new middle. Maybe what was top management will become a part of the middle management. Maybe a whole layer will disappear. I do agree that an organization will by and large have four broad bands: a strategic layer, a layer which is uh, operational plus strategic, a senior operational layer, and a completely operational layer. But while these bands may exist, a lot of operational people may become also quite strategic. Sometimes you may see organizations with an inverted pyramid. So I think in future, I don't think the middle management, as it were, is going to disappear. Having said that, in conventional text, in the conventional narratives, was that middle management is averse to change in TQM books and stuff like that. I don't believe that, but that's what is they're sometimes discredited for that. Someday, middle management has to become senior management. Someday, junior management became middle management. However, in twistier career paths and in careers where organizations flatter hierarchies have to be managed, I think the restlessness for promotions, the restlessness for growth needs to be toned down a little bit. I would look at a promotion as a today, if I was to recreate my career and restart a career when I was 22, I'd look at a promotion as a horizontal move. I'd look at a promotion as an opportunity to learn something new. I'd look at my growth, my personal growth first, and then promotion. So, therefore, the way we look at things also needs to change completely when we are in middle management, because that aspiration of pawing away and nibbling away at the heels of senior management saying, I think I want to get there, you better retire, you better go off, get off the block, needs to be replaced with another aspiration.
Very well articulated. Beena Simon refers to you talking about how to learn to say no, as that is one of the key areas that you spoke about. She's saying that is often perceived as not being flexible and not being a team player. So, how does one navigate one's way out around that?
Please practice it. I don't think there's any other way. I think when people understand you better, that you're saying no, not because you're stubborn or because you're rebellious or because you want to keep a cushion in every job with respect to timelines, but you're genuine and authentic, and you're saying that it's not possible because I need to do this, this, this. This is the building blocks for coming out with a new policy in the company. I need to ask this question of so many people. If you shortcut it, this is going to be the cost. I think to logically present a picture and to say no is very important. Often, in times like this, which are very stressful, when budgets are discussed, a senior person may tell you that, look, I think you can do it. I want you to do it this way. But a good leader uh, who is facing a subordinate who is pushing back and saying, no, I can't do it, is a person who can show the way. A person who can say, maybe you can experiment this way, or try this or try that, and so on. And I'll support you in it. So, therefore, saying no comes from various emotions. If you're saying no because of the fear of failure, it's a bad idea. If you're saying no because you come from a school where a promise is a promise and I need to keep the promise, it's a good idea.
I am cognizant of the time, but there are some very interesting questions. So, if you have 10 more minutes, may I?
Yeah, go ahead, Richard. Ruchira, go ahead.
So there's Neha who's asking, what should employers do to build a unique employer brand and a differentiated employer brand during these times?
Employers. She's talking about employers and not employees.
Yes,
Right? Employers. Am I right, Ruchiran? Yeah.
right, employers.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of literature on employee value proposition, which is actually built by employers. I think it's a great time to redefine your work culture, the levels of empathy that you have, your approach to costs, your approach to organization levels, your approach to ways of working, your approach to uh, presenting a picture of the employer which is professional. I think it's a fantastic time for employers to create a new brand. Uh, what today youngsters would look at, for example, an engineering campus or an MBA campus, is a company which gives them an opportunity to be entrepreneurial. Giving examples of how one can be entrepreneurial is a wonderful idea. Working with academic institutions, with youngsters in various teams to build that brand is a great idea. And to experiment, this is a great time for experimentation. I mean, everybody's uh, sometimes distracted by the negatives of what is happening around, but it's a great time to experiment and try new things. So I think the innovative capabilities, the idea capabilities, the willingness to look at things completely new are all employer brand values that can be transmitted. And also rediscovering, I mean, if you're an old organization, rediscovering your brand and telling people that you're also into these kind of companies which are very, very fast changing and agile in terms of their basic mental models can be done. Because sometimes people have mindsets that this is a company which is hierarchical or old fashioned and is static and doesn't move. But actually, the agility with which you have actually done a project or done a India's first or whatever it is, it's a great time to brand. In our case, Larsen Toubro, we built the world's tallest statue. We have several iconic projects which are of tremendous interest. We're supporting the Make in India, and we have lots to talk about in terms of great project management skills. So therefore, we want to brand ourselves around that and look for people who aspirationally want to spend careers in that line.
In fact, Rama yesterday spoke about conscious consumerism in a in a capitalism, rather. She spoke about conscious
Yeah.
capitalism in a and I'm glad as an HR professional, I see empathy coming back into the fold and the people taking into building more sustainable and long-term culture in the organization is becoming much more spoken about, at least, and I hope that continues. There's I'll one more question or maybe couple
Sure.
more question from Sushant Rajput. He is asking, in work from home scenario, what should one focus on? Should it be outputs or inputs?
I think it depends on the role one is handling. Uh, if you are a programmer or if you are in the job of coding and stuff, I'm sure companies have timesheets and they're very particular about how you fill in the timesheet, so the output matters. Uh, I think no output can be good enough unless the input is good. So the quality has to be excellent. I think this is a great question from the point of view of work from home, because while in the experiment that we are talking about, we were talking about a few minutes back, which is Bloom's experiment on work from home done in 2015. Uh, One of the things studied was quality of output. The quality of input will determine the quality of the output, irrespective of the quantum of output, and that is extremely important. So, the kind of distractions that you have, the kind of effort you put in is very different when you're working from home. There are advantages and disadvantages. And to answer as your question in a short manner, I think both matter, but depends on the role you're doing. I think in very strategic roles, I think input matters a lot. Output is difficult to measure. It can be measured, but in the longer run, but input matters a lot. The kind of application, the kind of detail you get into, the kind of facts that you collect, and so on are very important.
Right, so Shant, I hope you got your answer. Priyanka Arya has a very interesting question. She says, with more artificial intelligence and remote working scenario and virtual teams coming up into play, do we anticipate lesser number of jobs in HR in future? And if so, then which areas HR folks can focus more on and add to their skill set and continue to have their say at the table?
No, I don't expect lesser jobs. I expect that the nature of the jobs is going to change. Uh, there will be less emphasis on transactional stuff and much more emphasis on uh, transformational kind of activities. For example, analytics is going to be very important. For example, I would look at a good HR person, particularly a good learning and development person, as a good curator of knowledge. Just like you have curators in a museum, I would look at that person as a person who can bring in bodies of knowledge which are relevant for my people. Planning careers, succession planning, all these are extremely important abilities. And to use platforms and to use data in order to do these efficiently, effectively, quicker, and so on is very important. People are talking on the other side about gig working and stuff. So, since you just came out of a marketing exposure yesterday, there is something that I need to talk about in terms of marketing, even while you're talking addressing this question. There's something called countervailing power, and the theory of countervailing power was contributed by John Kenneth Galbraith, which means that on the one side, on the demand side, you have companies that need good talent. On the supply side, the talent offers itself. I think what is very important today is the ability for the talent to reorient itself to the demands of companies. And therefore, when I answer this question with respect to HR, what are people looking for in terms of employers for in their HR department? They're looking for multiple role handlers, okay? Not someone who handles just recruitment. They're looking for centers of excellence. So if you have a divisional HR structure, you double hat. You also handle division HR, plus you also double hat as a learning and development expert. They're looking for persons who can analyze a whole lot of data and get meaningful insights, just like that marketeer. A marketeer studies demographics, marketeer studies psychographics, and so on. I think an HR person, whether it's an engagement survey or the pattern of infections in the city or the company or wherever, needs to get into a deep dive, the pattern of recoveries, all that, and submit data from which a meaningful insight can be built. So analytics, learning and development through e-platforms, the ability to recruit and in a manner where you're able to reach out to talent which is in very remote places, the ability to size up the fit of the talent for your organization in times like this to analyze through public profiles, through profiles which are through various digital media, etc., a digital persona and fit it to what you require are all new skills that are very important for a HR person. So jobs will not disappear; they become different.
Shiv Kumar Swami talks about there is a time now from moving from action learning to really learning solutions and solution learning. How do you think organizations should structure their learning agenda to move to solution learning?
Through transparency. I think when you talk about action learning, it's actually going out there and doing a project in order to figure out about tastes, to find out about trends, to find out about economic trends, to study various factors concerning the economic environment of business and so on. When you're talking about solutions to a problem or solutioning, as you call it, what is very important is to be transparent about a particular issue which is uh, which is sort of a matter of concern for the organization. For example, leakages in supply chain, or a concrete issue concerning how to leverage a particular department much better to change its perception and so on. So I think sharing the problem statement and finding a solution along with the company representatives is going to become a new way of learning. So whether it's sourcing, or whether it is design thinking or appreciative inquiry or any technique that you use, involvement of multiple stakeholders is going to be very important in problem solving.
Time for one more question, sir, or
Okay, go ahead, please.
okay. So there is this question from Anu Bhandari. She says, "What, according to you, are the qualities of good leaders in today's world?" You spoke about it in a quite detailed way in your thought when you're sharing the thoughts. Uh, Two things, if she has to pick up what those two things should be.
I wrote an article very recently for ET Now, and it's come out maybe a day or two back. And what I've said there is, firstly, the ability to make a good judgment. There are several elements in making a good judgment, and I think it's very important in today's time to, first of all, so number one, you gave me two. So number one, to learn, which means that the ability to change track, acknowledge a mistake, state to people that you made the mistake, state the learning, and change tack. Second is to be very reflective about one's own biases and to understand it's perfectly normal to have your biases, but keep talking to people about what are those biases, how are they coming in the way in a particular decision, how are they influencing me, those slants and so on is very important. So since you just said two, but there are many more which are important for a leadership in terms of success in today's time. Kuhmo is a good example, if you ask me, of very coherent and decisive leadership in today's times. And maybe that's one more example that one can take of being decisive, of the ability to break up a problem into several parts. So if you look at a problem as a catena of several parts and deal with each part separately and solve each problem separately, you'll be more successful rather than getting overwhelmed by the biggest problem. So I would look at that as a third, if I'm permitted.
Thank you. This question is very different, and it actually takes us to absolutely to the base. So Sanmitra Malik asks, as you mentioned, that careers are going to be more agile than ever before. Shouldn't our education curriculum, right from school to post graduation, also be relooked at, and not only be only about digital learning?
I think we're getting there. I think people like me, when we studied in Delhi public school and stuff, didn't have Baiju and things. We have now a lot of platforms where one can digitally learn and learn the practical part. Curriculum, uh, uh, that's a very large kind of a topic that we're discussing. I think India has a fantastic educational system. If we can make it a little more practical, nothing like it. What I would like to see much more is outcome-based education. There are lots of agencies which provide a kind of a gold standard to education, which is great news. Are so we so Make no mistake in underestimating the quality of our education, which is why Indians are in demand all over the world. But I think what can be done is to bring in much more of a culture of do it yourself. People don't, they look at labs and they look at practical work. I think even engineers look at it as a kind of a necessity, not as a kind of something that's interesting. But I think celebrating the shop floor, going there to the construction site, working as a strong project manager, and across genders is a very important new skill to be taught in curriculums and so on, rather than shying away from the so-called. It's such an enigma in a country like ours. It needs a tremendous kind of a boost in terms of infrastructure. Most people do not want to take up careers in construction sites and so on. They want to hang around nice air conditioned offices and stuff, but they don't want to rough it out. I think curriculum which values that part of life also, and respects the fact that bridges and statues and roads and platforms and oil platforms and airports are not built only through sitting in offices is very important. So the practical side of the curriculum is good thing to introduce.
Thank you. You spoke about darker traits, which Hogan recognizes. So the question is actually from me, is that after recognizing those derailers, how does one go about shifting those mental models, those traits?
I think it's very important, Ruchira, to first of all find out how those are derailing you. I mean, just doing the psychometric test and getting those derailers and looking at them on a sheet of paper is one thing, but introspecting on each is very important. And I think contextually introspecting on them is very important. Am I craving for attention all the time, or is my listening poor? Are all characteristics that I need to look at in each of those traits. And also, I think the best way to check is with others around you. So uh, I think digesting them, reflecting on how they are preventing you in getting where you want to, and acknowledging them are important. Also, I want to say uh, some of them may not be that derailing. For example, let's say if you have a tendency to get angry, I think sometimes controlled anger is good. And I think because there's a very, very thin line between controlled anger and assertiveness. And I think if one feels very strongly about something without going out of control, making a point in a very assertive, strong way is important. Of course, as Desmond Tutu said, the volume of one's voice and the strength of one's argument need not be proportional. So you can say the same thing very softly, but your argument may be very strong, and it's controlled anger.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again for sharing
Thank
your
you.
insights. I'm sure these nuggets of wisdom, and there were many. I'm going to replay this entire talk, I think, multiple times to recapture the nuggets that you have shared. And I'm sure these nuggets of wisdom are extremely useful for our audiences who have been listening to you. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our community support partners, which is Resulticks, Adgully, Netcore, and Paul Writer. They actually ensured that our messages carried across to a large number of people. It is a community initiative by Future Generali Life Insurance, and your contribution is really well appreciated. This brings us to the end of this powerful session. Before I end it, I have one last question for you, sir. You
Sure.
spoke about refocusing and repurposing. What would be your advice to our audiences, especially the ones who would want to build a career in HR, and those of us who are wanting to, people who are wanting to aspire to take head HR positions in future?
So many of us had different reasons to choose a career. Some of us chose it because our aunts told us, our uncles told us, our cousins told us, the herd told us, and everybody else told us. I think it's very important to buy yourself a compass. Nowadays, you don't have to go out of your house to buy yourself a compass. You can even download it on your phone. So you download it on your phone and get to see where is your north. That's a metaphor, meaning that in HR, why do you want to be there? Are you fascinated by changing lives? Are you fascinated by seeing the power of making people discover their potential? It's so powerful when you see a person, let's say even an unlettered person who's being taught something new. The potential is enormous. When you see a small child whose perspective is changing, it's enormous. So the power of education, the power of knowledge, if you can appreciate that and you can make a difference to changing people's lives in terms of organization design, in terms of patterns, in terms of behaviors, in terms of culture, take the profession. In that you need to focus on some, because you want to, when you make a statement 8 years from now, in a seminar, people should take notes, right? They should say, this person Ruchira is an expert, let's say, in team building. So let me take notes on what she's saying. That is extremely important, I think, when you're talking about focus. Focus on a few things and do them really well.
Great. Thank you so much. And this
Thank
brings
you for the
us to
opportunity.
thank you. This brings us to the end of this powerful session. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining today. Please do mark your calendars for yet another Power Packed session. And the next one is going to be with Mr. Alpesh Shah on 3rd of June at 6:30 p.m. Alpesh is the managing director, partner of BCG India, and he would be unfolding revival playbook for BFSI post COVID-19. So do not forget to tune in. Till then, do keep safe and ensure you hashtag lock in good habits and build hashtag days of optimism. Thank you.